Welcome back to KSCJ Radio, 1360 AM, 94.9 FM in Sioux City, Iowa. I'm Brian Vikalskis, and this is Having Read That, conversations with authors about their books.
My guest is Nicholas Butler. He is a best-selling author. He is a writer. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he's out with his brand new novel. It is called Godspeed. It is available everywhere. Nicholas, I got to tell you, over the years, I've had so many people that have built their dream homes or had them built for themselves, and they always say the same thing to me: God, I could write a book, because the experience always sucks, and they always seem to have these great ideas that would make a great story. And I always think that's going to be a really boring story because so many people have the same story. That's kind of what you did here, though, and you made a hell of a thriller out of it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, a person, really doesn't want to complain about being in a position to build a house, but once you really get, knee deep into that process, there's nothing glamorous or sexy or really fun about it at all.
Well, the story itself is sort of based on true events. I think it says that right in the book. But can you kind of take us through where you set this up? Because you moved it outside of Wisconsin, which is where you normally set your books. You've moved it out west, and you kind of have a really cool setup for this.
Yeah, so back in 2014, we finished the process of building our house south of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and a family friend stopped by. He had been working on a new construction not so far from us, a multi-million-dollar house, and he was telling me that he and the other guys on the crew had kind of slipped behind on their deadline, and the homeowner got everybody together and offered each of them individually a 5-figure bonus if they could get the house finished in the next 3 weeks. And he said, Nick, if we had all the meth in the world, we couldn't have finished that house in 3 weeks. And I thought, that seems like a really interesting idea for a book. I began asking myself questions about, what kind of homeowner has that sort of money? Why does she have that kind of crazy deadline? And what if, rather than making the responsible choice of saying no to that sort of offer, what if a construction crew said yes? And what if, as they slipped behind on their own deadline, they had to resort to doing some dangerous things to get the bonus? And yeah, it's not set in Wisconsin like my other books, but I think that's because setting it in Jackson, you can really up the ante. It's one of the most, sort of Tony real estate markets, it's certainly in North America, and there's a lot of money out there, and so you can just sort of amplify the answers to all those questions I was asking myself.
Well, and the houses in Jackson, Wyoming we're talking about, they remind me of when I was driving through Dallas one time. I drove past a house that was for sale, and I thought, God, what would the payment on this be? And then I thought, if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it in the first place. That's kind of what Jackson's like, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty naive about it. We were on a family trip out to Yellowstone, and came down through Jackson, and I was like, oh, what a beautiful, quaint ski town. I wonder if we could live in a place like this. And then we got home from that sort of camping trip, and I started looking at real estate and just thought, how does anybody live here? And that was one of the central questions to the book, is what happens when your community starts to fill in with people that have way more money than you, and it sort of prices middle-class families out of even being citizens in the communities where they've lived for a long time, and where they do their work, where they're doing work for these ultra-rich folks. I wrote this. I started writing this book in 2019. To me, it's only gotten more timely because the housing market is just bananas right now.
Well, this book, when I got done reading it, I thought, well, who was the main character in this book? Because you had the three construction guys, Bart, Teddy, and Cole. There was Gretchen, the homeowner or builder, the one that wanted the house built. Then you had really the house itself, and then Jackson itself. This is a book that really doesn't have a main character, right?
I guess that's true, though. The way that I think about it is the guys in True Triangle Construction Company, the sort of three childhood friends that you were gesturing towards. I think of them as being kind of the wheels of this vehicle, this story, and they keep the story kind of moving along. And that would be fine if all I was interested in doing was writing like a action-packed thriller without a whole lot of heart. But I'm trying to write interesting, complete, whole characters, and so to me, the beating heart of the story is really Gretchen, because it's her backstory that explains why this house is being built exactly where it is, and not necessarily inside of Jackson or on the fringes of Jackson, but quite a little ways away from the city, in this impossible terrain, up in the mountains near hot springs, and it's her backstory that sort of unlocks the why of building it there, and also the why of the deadline.
When you have the three construction guys, the childhood friends, and I know character development is tough, and coming up with a backstory is tough, and making all their nuances work. But when you do that with three people who are operating as one unit, what kind of challenges do you have as the writer to make these? You've got one that's into drugs, you've got one that's very religious, you've got all these different things. How do you make them all play together?
It was fun for this book. I seem to always be interested in writing about friendships in my books. But the other aspect of that interest in friendship is that you can be friends with somebody for a long time and not completely know everything about them. And so, these three guys have different motivations for trying to get this amazing bonus. Teddy is the religious character that you were talking about. He's a family man. He's looking at this as his ticket for buying a house in Jackson and kind of securing his family's future. Cole is kind of the upstanding, business mind in the group, and he's thinking about this as a way of growing their business and really making a name for themselves. And the third corner of the triangle is a guy named Bart, who's sort of a loose cannon. He used a lot of drugs in the past, and what his friends don't know is that his knees are completely shot. So he's looking at this bonus as a way of getting out. But he can't tell them that quite yet. So
I'm chatting with Nicholas Butler about his brand new novel Godspeed. It's available and everywhere, and he also wrote that Shotgun Love Songs, which is just a fantastic novel. It came out a few years back, and I absolutely loved that one. But Nicholas graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and that's a storied program, probably one of the most famous MFA programs in the country. But I thought it was interesting reading up on you that you really telecommuted to that place, and you were there a few days a week. So I always think of these Writers Workshop attendees and students as people who are fully immersed in the Iowa City culture for 2 years. That really wasn't your experience, right?
Yeah, telecommute isn't accurate, but commuting is accurate. Yeah, my wife and my young son were we were all living north of Minneapolis, and so on Mondays I would drive down from Minneapolis when my wife got done with work, and then I would drive back on Wednesdays or Thursdays. So I was really commuting to school, and I was only there for, maybe 3-4 days of the week, and that's just how we had to do it as a family. I still attended all the classes. Of course, I had to, and it was probably the most important time in my writing career. The learning curve was so high. I went to school with so many fantastic writers and teachers, and I used that time so diligently. I really felt like if I wasn't using that time to write a great book, then what was my wife doing, more or less acting as a single parent back in Minnesota, and what was I doing spending time away from my 1-year-old son? And I added up all the time that I'd spent in the car, and it ended up being like 31 days of my life, over the course of those 2 years. And so it was like there was a constant fire burning in me or under me. It might sound cheesy, but I really thank the University of Iowa for that time, and I thank the people of the state of Iowa, because that is a magical program, and it brings a lot of I don't know how you'd say it, like attention to the state of Iowa in sort of a strange way, and it births so many wonderful artists and writers, and I'm grateful to be part of that lineage. I'm really grateful.
Well, for somebody who's a family man at the time you're there, a lot of the people there are, I would think, single. They're just out of college or out of other grad schools. And so you've got a family that you go from being a family man, 7 days a week, to now all of a sudden you're down there in this strange college town. How lonely do you get there as a father and as a husband, being away from your family, and where you don't have time just to sit and text? I mean, you got to write.
Yeah, great question. I think in all the years, I'm not sure anybody's really put it quite that way, but I appreciate the question. It was horrible. We were trying to save money because we were renting 2 apartments, right? The one in Minneapolis and the one down in Iowa City. So I was just living in these awful apartments. I was away from my wife, who I will be married to for 16 years this fall, and away from my beautiful boy. And but that really crystallized everything for me. I mean, I was not going out every night and drinking. I was not wasting time. I would allow myself basically 2 nights to go out. Like I'd get off the road and I'd have dinner with a good friend of mine who really kept me mentally healthy during that time, Marcus Burke, who's a novelist. And then I'd go out after workshop with the other people in my class, and that was the fellowship that I had. But that did still leave me 1 or 2 nights when I was in Iowa where I would just sit at a desk and work. And I credit that, loneliness for helping to create Shotgun Love Songs.
When you go into a program like that with, as you've said, so many wonderful writers that have come out of there, and they still come out of there today, do you feel the ghosts of the past of that? Because to me it has sort of an aura of playing a baseball game at Wrigley Field or at Fenway Park. You feel the ghosts of the past. Is it kind of that way for a writer's workshop?
That's a good question. I don't know if I would fully say ghosts, but I did feel like I was, I hate to resort to, I felt like I was part of a line or a lineage, and I did, Iowa City has such deep literary history that, I would look for places where Dennis Johnson had spent time when he was there, or Kurt Vonnegut, or Raymond Carver, and, I suppose sitting in the Foxhead Bar drinking a beer, you are thinking about the other writers that came before you. But I didn't have a whole lot of time to feel haunted, Brian. I was mostly tired and lonely and trying to keep my nose on the grindstone.
You'd clearly written things before you got there. You have to be a heck of a writer just to get into the program, but how much did it tear you down and build you back up into the writer that you are today?
There's a little bit of that. I think it was a lot. I think it was, frankly, mentally more grueling probably before. I'll just use the word before vaguely, 80s, 90s, 70s, 60s. I think when Sam Chang came in as the director, there was kind of a new sense of compassion that the program took on, and I love Sam, and I credit her with a lot. It is mentally difficult because you're putting forth something that's really personal to you that you feel passionate about. And if somebody finds a hole in that work or doesn't like it, that's hard to take. But that's also part of the business of being a writer. And there were certainly days I left workshop and just felt really beat up and, not sure what I was doing there. But I also met some of the best friends of my life. And had teachers that I still think about, I'm not exaggerating, every day. So for me, it wasn't a negative experience at all. It was, again, it sort of crystallized my resolve.
Well, there seem to be three types of people that come out of there. Some that never write a book and they just get into some other industry. Some that write one novel and never look back and never write another one. And then you've been publishing ever since you got out of there, and you've published another great one here. It's called Godspeed. It's by Nicholas Butler. The book is available everywhere. Nicholas, just a fantastic novel. I loved it. I love your story about the workshop, and I thank you for joining me to talk about it.
Hey, Brian, I appreciate it sincerely, and have a great morning, and thanks for reading my book.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This has been Having Read That on KSCJ Radio in Sioux City, Iowa. I'm Brian Vakalskis. Check out all of our episodes on our website, kscj.com. Also be sure to like Having Read That on Facebook and subscribe to our iTunes podcast. Thanks to segment producer John Weisler. We will be back next time.